Okay guys, we're busy hiking along to Nursery Ravine to get the waterfalls, and as you can see on our way up, the waterfalls are pumping. Lots of water. I'm excited to get to Nursery Ravine, and we're going to show you some epic content now. But look at the waterfalls all flowing along all the contours as we're heading to Nursery. Okay guys, we are shooting the waterfalls, and as you can see, how epic is that waterfall behind me. Super epic. So at Nursery Ravine shooting the waterfalls and I'll share the content with you guys shortly when we're done.
Today we're going to be talking about, do you need a polarizer, as well as shooting waterfalls. So yesterday I went out and shot waterfalls along Skeleton Gorge and Nursery Ravine near Kirstenbosch, and had a great time hiking up there in the contour paths and finding the waterfalls. So in terms of filters, I use a 3-stop 90% of the time. This is my favorite ND filter. ND is neutral density, and that just allows you to get that short water motion anywhere between half a second up to 2-3 seconds, depending on how dark the scene is, but it gives you that nice short water motion that I love, and I use this filter 90% of the time. Other filter I use almost 100% of the time is the polarizer. This is for anything where you have any reflective glare, just like your sunglasses. When that sun is bouncing off of the rocks and they're wet, shooting seascapes or waterfalls, you're going to get that reflective glare, and this just cuts through that and you don't have that glare. And I'll explain what that means, and I'll show you examples in the images that I've captured shortly. But polarizer, really important when shooting anything with water or with reflections and glare. So always use polarizer. This is one of the things you can't replicate in post-production, and it's a very powerful filter, and I would always recommend this to be your first filter to purchase if you're looking at purchasing filters. Would be a polarizer, and then stepping up to the neutral density filters, and then potentially the graduated filters. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you now and jump into the images and show you a little bit behind the scenes that I got up to while shooting the waterfalls.
Skeleton Gorge waterfall now. I hope you can hear me, but as you can see, the waterfall behind me is flowing brilliantly, so we're getting some really cool shots. I'm using a polarizer. I'm going to show you shortly what difference the polarizer makes when you use it in a scene like this, especially when there's a lot of reflective glare on the rocks and a lot of green foliage. The polarizer really pops out those elements, and it makes a massive difference. And this is one of those elements you can't reproduce during editing. So very important for forests and waterfalls to use a polarizer. I'm also using a 3-stop ND filter to get water motion, and I'm shooting in this rapidly moving water between about 1 second and 2 seconds to get some nice water motion.
Okay, so the question that I'm asking in this YouTube video is, do you need a polarizing filter? I know many guys that shoot landscapes don't use polarizing filters, but I'm going to show you the power of using a polarizer when shooting landscapes, especially for seascapes or waterfall scenes, anything where there's a body of water. This generally means that there'll be reflective glare from when the rocks are wet and the sun's bouncing off of that, as well as the ability of glare across the surface of the water and the ability for your camera to penetrate into the water below. And this is one aspect where the polarizer makes a big difference. It eliminates that glare and allows you to almost see through the water without any of that glare on the surface. Especially with forest scenes as well, what happens with the polarizer is it pops the greens out of the foliage and just makes it look a lot more lush and a lot more vibrant when shooting a forest scene. So yeah, 2 images. I've put the settings up on the screen as well. So if you look at the image on the left and the image on the right, you can see they're both shot at 2.5 seconds. I used a 3-stop ND filter to capture both of these images. I shot at f5.6 and ISO 100, and they were both shot at 16 millimeters. And I think you can see by just looking at these two pictures that initially they look very similar when you looked at them, but if you look a little bit closer, there is a difference between the image on the left and the image on the right. And if you look at the image on the right, especially if you look at this rock over here in the foreground, and then you look at the same area on the other side, you can see there's some reflective glare happening, bouncing off that rock, and on this one there isn't, and there's a lot of detail that's come through with the mosses. Same thing if you look at the foliage at the back of the image, you can see there's a lot of that reflective glare off of the leaves because they're wet and they are shiny. And when we come across to the other image, you can see a lot more lush greens, a lot more vibrant greens coming through. So I think by now you've sort of worked out that the image on your left is the one with the non-polarized image, and the image on your right is using a polarizer. You can see that the one with the polarizer is the more attractive image, as you don't have a lot of that glare and you've got a lot more vibrant colors. So let's zoom in and let's zoom in on those back leaves in both images in the same area. And you can see, looking at the same area on the left without the polarizer, you're getting all that reflective glare off of the leaves, and with the polarizer it's just pulled back all that color detail and all that information, so a lot more vibrant. Then if we go in onto the rocks and the water, again you can see if you look at this area on the rock in both images, a lot more detail is recovered with the polarizer. You don't have that white from the glare, and these mosses are a lot more vibrant. As well as in the actual water, you're getting much richer white tones coming through and a lot of detail coming through from behind the mosses as well. So using a polarizer, definitely a must. Again, if you look up here at this rock and at these rocks here, you can see all of that reflective glare, and that is all recovered with the polarizer. So polarizer, very powerful, definitely a must to use for forest scenes. Let's do another example at Skeleton Gorge Waterfall. Again, setting same, 1 second, f4, ISO 100, and shot 13.5 millimeters. And I think this is even more apparent, the difference that the polarizer makes when you're looking at these lush greens, and all that reflection off of the rocks is preserved with the polarizer. And there you can see, especially in the waterfalls flowing, and there's all that reflection off of those rocks, that is preserved with the polarizer, and you can get a lot more detail now. Those whites are popping a lot more off of that darker background, and there we go, that's a good example. You can see very clearly now the difference that the polarizer makes when shooting these type of scenes, especially when there's a lot of water and a lot of green foliage. It just pops out those white lines from the water as it cascades down the rocks, whereas without the polarizer it looks very muddied. You lose a lot of that detail in the white water. So for forest scenes, definitely use a polarizer. I would say always use a polarizer when you're shooting anything with water. It's a good rule to do it. There are negatives for using polarizers, and that's why some people stay away from them. The biggest negative would be if you're shooting very wide on a very blue sky. You get something that looks like a very dark patch in your sky. This is a negative, very difficult to remove. So there are instances when using a polarizer is not the best option, and you would simply then remove the polarizer. But shooting anything like forest scenes like I've shown you here, polarizer makes a massive difference. So highly recommend using a polarizer. If you have any questions about using filters or anything like that, please ask me in the comments section below. Happy to help. I've been using filters for many years and absolutely love using them, so can answer any questions on filter usage.